week we're going to start with chapter 22. I think we'll get through and into chapter 23. But just to reflect on where we've been. Now Paul he's gone to Jerusalem, and last week we saw how he ticked them people off. I mean, they were mad, they hated Paul. But then when the Asian Jews showed up, they led the crowd against Paul, so they take him out and they're going to beat him. So Paul is arrested, but when we talked about it last week, we talked about, if you look up in the upper right-hand corner, I don't know what to do on my corner. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the Antonia Fortress. And we talked about that a little bit last week. I don't know what to do with it, Rita.
It's all right.
But anyway, this thing is important. This structure right here, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later on. But Paul is in the temple. Now then, what we're looking at is the Temple Mount. This temple is there in the center, and it was rebuilt on the plans of the original temple. The thing has been there for over 400 years. Herod the Great comes in, and not only does he refurbish the temple, but he comes in and he completes the Temple Mount, and he builds the fortress. All right, in the temple itself, if you would look at it, the huge structure is where the Ark of the Covenant is housed, and that is the Holy of Holies. The middle set of doors that you see there, that goes into where only the men can go in. This outer court is known as the court of women, and the women could go in there. The only people that is allowed in this structure is the Jews themselves. No Gentiles are allowed. Now then, Paul gets into it, or these people begin to argue with Paul, the men do, inside that second set of doors. Now then, they drag Paul out, they carry him through these doors, out into the street, and begin to beat him. Now then, when we look back at the structure at Antonio's fortress, those men can look down and they can look into the courtyard and they can see what's going on. And they see that Paul is being beaten. Now then, as we begin to read and study this, we see that Paul is going to be dragged out. They're going to take him out, and they're going to take him to the Antonia fortress. The steps that you see right here is the way that you enter in. So they had to come out of the Temple Mount itself to go into the fortress. It is there that Paul is going to stop and say, hey, look, I want to address these people. Now then, in verse 40, that is the end of chapter 21, and that's where he does this. But I know that several times you've had to hear Boatwright Devin talk about in Coach Martin's class. He'd hold up the Bible in one hand and the history book in the other and say, I'm going to take this to prove this, and I'll take this to prove that. And that, the Antonia Fortress, is one of those connections that is used to prove the scriptures, to prove the existence of Christ, to prove that everything that has taken place in the Bible is true. And it is because of these two people right here, Anthony and Cleopatra. Now, we go back to the story of their relationship and Octavian and how things took place. Anthony and King Herod the Great were the best of friends. And that is why he built the fortress as he was refurbishing the temple or building the Temple Mount. Now then, we know that the fortress itself was built somewhere around 40 to 40 BC, somewhere in there. And the reason we say that is because Mark Antony's going to commit suicide not long after his relationship with Cleopatra. So we take that and we have all the historical, if you want to call it proof or secular writings from no more than 28 first century historians. Now folks, you might can say one or two, well, they collaborated, but when you got 28 different historians from that time period writing about the same thing and what has happened, you can pretty much say, well, that's like a Bible, it's gospel. So we've got that there. As they're going up the steps, let's go back. Now Mark will probably know what I'm talking about here. How many of you, I want to show of hands, how many of you actually use a commentary? Okay. Now then, commentaries are good. I use commentaries too, but the best information that you will ever get from a Bible is to go online, go to Amazon, and order you a textbook from Survey of the Old Testament or Survey of the New Testament. And what you're going to get is you're going to get the history and the how-to and the why of everything that has happened. So I would take that as I would teach Rest in Civilization to prove the Bible, because everything comes together when you actually understand and have a basis of the understanding of the Old Testament. Now the Old Testament is about the relationship of God and His people, the Hebrews. The New Testament is nothing more than about Jesus and about you as an individual, giving us personal instructions in that New Testament in how we can live a better life and a more fulfilling life. So if you really want to, order you either one of those books and read your Bible along with that, and you're going to say, wow, I didn't know that. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in. Well, what has happened is Paul has taken up the steps and he has to address the crowd. And picking up in verse 22 or chapter 22, he says, brothers and fathers, hear my defense. I offer you. And when they heard that he was addressing them in Hebrew, in the Hebrew dialect, they became even more quiet. Remember back in chapter 21, Paul has been accused of being from Egypt. They thought he was the one that led a rebellion 3 years prior to this, but it's not. And once they get there, and he has to address the crowd, the commander says, well, sure, go ahead. And Paul looks at him and he says, hey, I'm a Jew. I was born in Tarsus, Cilicia, but brought up in this city, educated by Gamaliel, strictly according to the law of our fathers, being zealous of God, just as you are today. Now then, there's a couple things we want to look at here. Number one is when he says he is from Tarsus, and Tarsus is the capital of Asia Minor. It's the Roman capital of Asia Minor. So here they're going to speak many different dialects because people are coming to this area from all over the known world. The population of this city is somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 to 300,000 people. Now that's a pretty big city. So that is where he is at. But he was born to, we'll get to that in a moment, but he was educated sometime early in his life, probably pre-teens or early teens, he goes to Jerusalem, and there he's going to be educated by one of the leaders of the Sanhedrin. Now this Gamaliel is the very same one that told the Jews that, hey, leave them alone, talking about the disciples. You need to leave them alone. If it's of God, there ain't nothing you can do about it. So that's who this guy is. But he says he's strictly educated in the law. Paul not only knows those 613 commandments that Moses gave, but he knows everything about the prophets and the prophecy predicting the Messiah and the coming of the Christ. So Paul, he knows this. He is educated. Now then, he is going from there until the age of 35. Look at what he says. He says, hey, y'all know me. Y'all know me. The high priest knows me. He said, I persecuted this way to death, binding and putting both men and women in prison, as also the high priest and the council and the elders can testify. They knew Paul. They knew what he did. But for 33 years, he is going to preach and testify about the saving grace of Jesus Christ. He is going to be the leader, the main leader of the Christian churches. So he said, I started off for Damascus in order to bring even those who were there back to Jerusalem as prisoners to be punished. These men that he is standing before 33 years earlier gave him letters to go to Asia Minor to persecute and to gather all these dissidents, these Jews. They hated him. So, as we talk about this, in Jerusalem in the first century, there were two primary dialects. There was Aramaic and there was Hebrew, and that is what they spoke. Jesus could speak anything he wanted to, but Jesus spoke Aramaic. He understood the Greek. Now, Greek in Jerusalem at this time was the language that was going to be used by the very well educated. And you're going to have a lot of these religious leaders who are educated. They know the Greek, they know Hebrew, and they can speak Arabic. So they can carry on a conversation with just about anybody. The Roman troops themselves, however, they spoke Greek. And this, according to them and the historians, was the mother language of not only back in Mesopotamia, Caesarea, Samaria, but in Jerusalem as well. Everyone spoke that because of the Hellenistic culture. Now then, Latin is going to be spoke only by the upper class Romans. But as we progress in history, that Latin is going to become one of the languages that is well spoken. Here in the South, prior to the Civil War, if you went to elementary school, you are going to be taught Latin. And that's something that we seem to forget. But Latin was used here in the South. I mean, why we got away from it, I don't know. I guess because we couldn't understand. Anyway, just throw that in there for you. Okay. Now then, as we pick up our story in verse 6 through 22, Paul tells the story of his conversion and salvation as he is going to Damascus. Now then, there's no reason to go over. We've already talked about it, so we're not going to do it again. However, when he tells these folks this, they get fighting mad at him. If you look at verse 23, it says they got so mad they were screaming and hollering and acting crazy. They tore off her clothes. They took up dust and threw it up in their hair so it would fall on them. Now, what kind of crazy people would do that? Just get some edge, take off the clothes. I ain't never been that bad. Now, Christy there, I have seen her get so mad when she was like 5 years old that she would lay down in the floor, and she only did this one time. I'm picking on you, Christy. And she's there, and her mother's washing dishes, and she looks at Christy, and she turns on, gets a glass, and puts cold water in it, and just doused her. Christy ain't never pitched a fit since.
That you seen.
Well, that I've seen. Well, I believe she can still get pretty mad. Anyway, but that's what these folks are doing. And in verse 24, it says that they grab Paul, the army does, the Roman soldiers do. They come and get Paul. But these people hate Paul. They hate that he is teaching against the rules that they have added to the law. Now get that. They've added rules to the law. Now then, they get Paul, and they're going to take, when he gets through, they're going to take him in, they're going to whip him. They're going to put him down, they're going to scourge him. So in 24, it says that the commander ordered that he be brought to the barracks, saying that he was going to be interrogated by flogging. They're going to find out what's going on. They're going to find out the reason that they're doing this to him. I kind of akin this to like, the United States has been known to do some interrogation of prisoners by waterboarding. I don't know if I'd rather be whipped or waterboarded, but anyway, that is their idea of finding out what's going to happen. But when they stretched him out and getting ready to flog him, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman and uncondemned? And when the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and told him, saying, hey, what are you going to do? For this man is a Roman. And the commander came to Paul, tell me, are you a Roman? And Paul said, yes. Now then, there's something that you need to know here. Well, let's look and see what the commander answered. When Paul said yes, the commander answered, I acquired this citizenship for a large sum of money. Paul said, I was actually born a citizen. Now then, we can put the time frame of what is happening here somewhere around 41 to 54 AD. And the reason we can do that is because the emperor at the time is Claudius, and that's his reign. During the reign of Claudius, a slave was allowed to buy his freedom and to become a Roman citizen. And that's what the commander is referring to. Hey, I acquired my citizenship by a large sum of money. Also, during this time, you could go to certain Roman officials and you could bribe them and not have to pay as much. But in the town or the city that you're living in or the province, you would be considered a Roman soldier. Now, there is going to be some advantages to being a citizen. Now, number one, they had the right to a defense by trial. You had to be accused, you had to have a trial. Now then, depending on the outcome, if you were found guilty, you had the right to appeal that verdict. And there you go before another group of men. Now then, as a citizen, you could not be held, you couldn't be held, you couldn't be whipped, you couldn't be flogged because you're a citizen. You had to go to trial. The only way that they would whip you was if you were found guilty of something and the only way that they could kill you if you were found guilty of treason. Now then, this is important. A Roman citizen could not be crucified. They could kill you, but they couldn't crucify you. So this is pretty big stuff. Now then, you go back, remember when in Philippi, back in chapter 21, I think, when Paul and Silas were taken and they were beaten, and then they remind them, hey, we're citizens of Rome, I'm a Roman citizen, and them people that whipped them, they was fearful for their lives because they could suffer the same punishment that they had put on Paul and Silas. So these guys, when that guy said, what are you, went to the question, what are you going to do about it? I ain't going to do nothing. What are you going to do about it? So he's getting it off of himself. So in verse 29, he says, therefore, those who were about to be interrogating him immediately backed away from him, and the commander also was afraid, and when he found out that he was Roman, because he had put him in chains. Now, on the next day, they're wanting to know for certain why Paul is so hated by these Jews, why they want to put him to death, that the commander orders, he sends an order to the high priest and to the council. Now the council here is going to be the Sanhedrin, okay? Sanhedrin, remember, is made up of 70 members, 71 if you include the high priest. So you got 70 members, and it's a split between Sadducees and Pharisees. This is going to be important because Paul knows what's going to happen. So they take him before the council, they bring Paul in, and they placed him before the council. Now then, he's standing there, they're all there, they're hollering, they're screaming at him, and look in verse 23. He says, now looking intently at the council, Paul says, brothers, I've lived my life with an entirely good conscience before God up to this day. But the high priest, Ananias, commanded those standing beside him to strike him on the mouth. Uh-oh, he has messed up. Paul said to him, God's going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Do not try me to try me according to the law, in violation of the law. Order me to be struck. What he's saying is, you are trying to go with the law, and you don't even keep the law. You have added to the law. Plus, he's a Roman citizen. That Jew cannot order him to be struck. Hey, high priest is getting in trouble here. Now then, in Ananias, in the New Testament, there's going to be three Ananiases. And sometimes it's kind of, well, two of them it's kind of hard to keep up with. The first Ananias is going to be Ananias and Sophia, you know, the ones that sold the parcel of land and God struck them dead. The second Ananias is going to be really important in Saul's salvation. Remember, Saul has the letter from the other council, from the Sanhedrin, to go and grab all these people back in Tarsus. All right, so in Damascus. So he's on his way. God strikes him down by lightning, or strikes him blind. Paul is carried to Damascus. People doesn't have anything to do with him. Then Jesus comes to a man, a disciple named Ananias, and he says, Ananias, I want you to go to Paul, and I want you to restore his sight. And you're going to tell him that he is going to preach for me to the Gentiles. So that's who the other Ananias is. He is very important. Now, Mark, and I hope maybe he can help me. Did he not do a lot to spread, this Ananias do a lot to spread the gospel? Go to different places in Asia Minor.
He did, and that
Okay. Well, I think he did, but again, I don't want to do all this digging. I'm doing enough digging. Anyway, so that's the other. Then the third Ananias, this guy is a scandal. Folks, he's known to be ruthless. He was cruel, and he was full of corruption. Selling the animals on the Temple Mount, the sacrificial animals on the Temple Mount, the money went into his pocket. His family became extremely wealthy because of his, I guess politics, but they became rich because of his connections to the church. Now, it kind of sounds like politicians today, don't it? You know? But that's who this guy is. Well, so, where am I at? I said, verse 4. But those present said, are you insulting God's high priest? And Paul said, I'm not aware, brothers, that he's high priest, for it's written, you shall not speak evil of the ruler of your people. So is Ananias really a ruler? And when we get into, again, secular studies about this Ananias, this guy ain't a good dude. I mean, he is as ruthless and as corrupt as they come. He is not a good person. But he is going to rule until the Jewish revolt prior to the temple being destroyed. And I think he's going to last about 66 AD. But anyway, that's where we're at with him.